The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. It is a gloomy day here in Los Angeles, but not gloomy if you're an NBA fan, because this might be the worst NBA lottery of all time, and we're going to bang out the ping pong balls tonight. A guy on the Subway Fresh Take hotline right now who has spent more time analyzing this dreck of a draft than I think anybody. Our own Chad Ford. What's happening?
Thanks. That's a high honor.
Yeah.
More time analyzing this dreck of a draft. I like that.
Well, our boy Enes Kanter, I've now talked myself into him being the next Larry Bird because there's nobody else to talk about.
I think that's where we're going in this draft, is trying to say that Kyrie Irving is, maybe the next Chris Paul, or Enes Kanter, is going to be the next Larry Bird. It's one of those drafts where, if everybody's being honest with each other, these are a lot of solid players. Some of them will be rotation guys in the league. A few of them will be starters. We might even get an all-star out of this group, but there's nobody in this draft, at least as it looks right now, that's going to turn a franchise around the way a guy like a Derrick Rose or a LeBron James or a Dwight Howard is. And I'm not even sure that there's close to that.
Enes Kanter, the most interesting guy in this draft. He really has one of the worst career advisors, I think, in the history of professional basketball. I think, Lloyd Daniels obviously is up there. There's some other ones. But this guy left Turkey to come. I guess he thought he was going to get into college, but he was from Turkey. He couldn't speak English, and basically wasted 2 years of where he should have been at least playing against somebody. Didn't really get to play against everybody. Tell his story.
Well, it is an interesting story, and I'm not sure that at the end of the day it was a stupid thing to do, because he might be the number 2 or 3 pick in the draft, and if that's the case, he looks brilliant. He was a very talented young player in Turkey that whenever he played in the younger international championship sort of tournaments, this guy won, I think, 5 straight MVPs in these international tournaments, and he was signed by Fenerbahce, which is one of the top 2 pro teams in Turkey. They're a EuroLeague team, at the age of 16, and they actually played him as a 16-year-old. I think he played in a total of 9 games, 5 of them in the EuroLeague as a 16-year-old, which is very, very rare in Europe to see that happen. He didn't really put up anything as far as numbers go, but he was in those games. And then he went into that summer as a 17-year-old, and he absolutely dominated the under-18 European Championships in front of a load of NBA scouts.
Yep.
Many guys thinking, this guy could be the next it thing. And he had a very difficult decision to make. Fenerbahce offered him a multi-million-dollar contract to be there, but it was a 5-year deal. There were not really NBA outs. He was probably stuck there in Turkey until he was at the age of 22. And European teams are notorious for, once they have those young players locked up, really benching them in favor of veterans, and they don't develop. Or he could roll the dice and come to the United States and try to get into a college and try to go that route. And, in this particular case, I don't think he was paid a salary. I don't think that's what was in question by the NCAA. It was that as a player, he received all sorts of benefits, like an apartment and a per diem and things like that. His father is a doctor with a PhD, does stem cell research. It wasn't like they needed the money, and as I said, they turned down a multi-million-dollar deal to come to the United States. And so when he got here, I think he thought he was going to be eligible for college. I mean, thinking about how some of these top American high school players get paid. it seems sort of odd that the NCAA would pick on him. But, at the end of the day, he had one great game, and that was at the Nike Hoop Summit in front of about every NBA GM and scout that was there. He dominated Jared Sullinger, set a Nike Hoop Summit record for points scored, did it all in 22 minutes. And that's the lasting memory that we have of Enes Kanter. He has not played one competitive game since then. Teams have seen him in practices in Kentucky. I just saw him the other day at Tim Grover's gym in Chicago working out, prepping for the draft. But you're going to draft this guy basically on 2 games that scouts may have seen him at. And as far as NBA decision makers go, really 1 game.
I heard that he dropped 35 on Yi Jinlan's chair last week. I don't know if you heard about that game.
That's what he's going to do now. It's solely workouts. He's not going to work out against anybody else. They're not going to see him in really a competitive environment. It's now going to be watching this guy shoot jump shots and run through cones in an NBA gym.
Well, a couple of things I like about him, as you mentioned, and maybe you're right. Maybe this wasn't one of the worst career moves ever. Although I do find it weird that a scenario where you basically don't play competitive basketball for over a year isn't great in any capacity. But it does seem like he has a good family. Seems like he's smart. Seems like I like the things I've read about him. I love how he produced in those games. Seems like he rebounds. And is this fair to say that because he's from Turkey, like we've had success with players from Turkey?
We have.
Is that profiling? Is that profiling to say that?
I don't know if it's profiling, but there has been a pretty high success rate with Turkish players in the NBA that have made it. I don't know if that has something to do with the culture or the quality of basketball or whether NBA scouts are just smarter about picking these guys. I will say this about Kanter. He's not soft. He's tough. He's physical. He likes to play down low. And he's skilled. And he has a very high IQ. Whether that translates into the NBA game, I mean, you're really guessing at this point because, a Nike Hoop Summit game or a European Under-18 championship game, those aren't even like real basketball in a lot of ways. They're all-star games, essentially. And
but you like seeing that somebody's gonna basically crash the boards and get his points. Like you're gonna do that in a game. That's good.
He's got a good body. He's a decent size for his position, and he's a solid athlete. He's not Blake Griffin, but when watching him work out, he reminded me of a tougher Carlos Boozer. And that if in this draft, that's great.
And you're carrying the scars from Darko in 2003.
Oh, trust me, yeah.
And with the foreigners and the Euros and this whole group, this is a draft that is absolutely loaded with potential guys from other countries that we didn't get to watch in the tournament and all these guys. Another really, really interesting guy that you've been talking about for a while is Jan Vesely.
Yeah.
You've liked him for years.
Yeah, because he's not like other European players. He's an athlete first and foremost. He's a 6'11" guy who runs the floor, and if you watch him on YouTube, most of the highlights you're going to see are posterizing dunks. That's what he does. He runs the floor, and he's terrific finishing around the basket. He's not particularly skilled in the ways that we typically think about European players. My guess is that as he gets into workouts, he'll look good athletically, but he won't be hitting, jump shots and doing all the things that a lot of those European players did to get drafted. He's a different sort of player, and he's been playing at the highest level in Europe. He's been playing in the EuroLeague. He's been playing in the best team in Serbia, a starter there, big minutes, big role on the team. And so this isn't one of these kids that, like the Darkos of the world, that were young, were playing sporadic minutes on bad teams, and you're really drafting them based off of what they do in a workout and what you see in practice. This kid has a pretty impressive resume behind him at the European level, and usually NBA teams have better success with international players when they've played a substantial role on their team in Europe.
It sounds like this is a guy who could potentially be a cross-racial comparison guy, which you rarely see with the draft. Like, who would you compare him to? It sounds like he's an energy guy, runner, leaper. Yeah,
that's what he is. I'm trying to think of who the he's pretty thin. He's not doesn't have a great body on him. I'm trying to think of who that is.
So maybe like a young Stromile Swift, if Stromile Swift had been good.
Yeah, maybe something like that.
And then you have another one here. This one's a tough one. I'm going to mangle this name. Jonas Valanciunas. Is that it? Did I get close?
Yeah, I think that's close. Look,
right.
I'm not an expert in pronouncing these guys' names either.
From Lithuania, 19, power forward, 6'10", 230. Do we like him?
Yeah, I've had a hard time with him.
Huh.
I like him. He's put up big numbers in Lithuania before he changed to another team. Another guy who was a young prodigy. Scouts started picking him out at 16. Plays really hard. I like that. My question with him is, I'm not sure there's one thing that he does that is great. He's not big enough to be an NBA center, I don't think. I think he's a power forward. I don't think he's a great athlete. I think he's solid. He's not a stiff, but he's not a great athlete. And when you watch the tape on him, you see the glimpses of how he can be special, and you see that he's aggressive, and that's something that you like to see out of the international players. But I don't quite see the superstar that I know some scouts have sort of made him out to be. And on top of that, he has some interesting contract issues, which a lot of these international players do. He has some especially interesting contract issues. And the feedback I'm starting to get from NBA teams now is that most likely he could be in a Ricky Rubio sort of situation where it might be several years before he's able to get out of his buyout and come to the NBA. And if that's the case, and a lot of times there's a lot of rope-a-dope with the agent and the international team over exactly what the contract is and exactly what it says and things like that. So there's a reason why you don't have definitive knowledge about this. But if that's the case, he probably slides in the draft, because I think everybody's watching what's happened with Minnesota and Ricky Rubio and David Kahn, and I don't think this player especially is going to be worth that headache.
He sounds a little Yijin Lani. The 6'10", skinny guy. You don't really know what his elite skill is. He can kind of do everything well, but when you throw him in an NBA game, you watch him and you go, what does this guy do?
Except he's more aggressive. I mean, I think part of it was one of those really interesting workout guys that was pretty soft. I don't think this kid is soft, and if there's a reason to sort of keep him up higher on the boards, it's because I don't think that's something that they would say, any scout would say about him, is he's soft. That's his biggest issue.
Yeah,
the guy is just incredibly soft, and it's very tough to thrive as a power forward in the NBA when you're that soft.
Well, I'm really excited for this other guy, Bismack Biyombo.
Yeah.
What a great name that is. And if Marv Albert can scream that name after a dunk, then I think we're off for the better. Bismack Biyombo! So tell us about him.
Well, I think NBA teams are hoping that they found another Serge Ibaka. I think that's the idea. Another guy who really was not heavily on the radar until a couple of international scouts told me about him. I think it was sometime in January. And at the time, he was playing in Spain, and he was getting minutes, and he's a man, so he's cleaning up rebounds and blocking shots and what have you. And this draft was so weak, there was just sort of a frenzy that sort of happened in the next two months. Teams just got excited. They started sending people over there. You're constantly looking for big, athletic 4-5s who can rebound and block shots. It's a very rare commodity in any draft. And then he did what Kanter did last year. He came into the Nike Hoop Summit and absolutely destroyed the competition with the rebounding and shot blocking, and that got everyone excited because you could clearly see that he had NBA-level athleticism. He had an NBA body, and he had a very active motor. He played very hard, very aggressively. I think teams were impressed with him in how he was a leader on the team, and that's it. He took off back to Spain. He's not playing with a Spanish team. He's working out in some private gym in Spain. He's not, from what I understand, going to come over to the NBA and even do team workouts. And you're going to, a bit like Kanter, be drafting him off one great game.
I like him, and I think he climbs in the draft, and here's why. there was the backlash against the foreign players post Darko and post Tishkavili and a couple of these other guys. The Ibaka thing, I think, has now swung it the other way. And the Ibaka pick, when you look at the last 10 years of drafts, I think the Ibaka pick is one of the 5 best picks of the last 10 years.
It's a terrific pick, but you better know what you're getting. I think the thing with the Thunder is there was a lot of research done. There was a lot of understanding of who this kid was, and he wasn't ready when they drafted him, but they felt like he was the type of kid that would put in the work, that they could put in the D-League, that he'd develop and eventually become the player that he's become.
Yes.
And it also requires great coaches. It requires the right front office, the right system to get this guy ready. In a lot of ways, Serge Ibaka is a success story, but I'm not exactly sure that every team could replicate it. Even if they have the same player, there's so many factors that go in to this. And you know this, Bill. In the draft every year, there's 1 or 2 guys that can make it on virtually any team. And, you know, we see this with Blake Griffin. If Blake Griffin can make it on the Clippers, he can make it on any team. It doesn't really matter the coach, doesn't matter the front office, doesn't matter the supporting cast behind him. He's so good, he makes it everywhere. Almost every other player in the draft, it's a very situational sort of thing. You got to have the right coach, the right system, the right opportunities, the right development, make the right choices, and you can be a really good NBA player. And if none of that happens, you can have a lot of talent and flame out in the league.
That's why I love the Ibaka pick so much, because where they got him and also how much thought they put into it. And they really researched the guy and some of the stuff he'd been through in his life and the way he grew up and the chances he took when he was 16 and 17. And they really thought, like, all right, here's our plan for this pick once we make it, which I don't think a lot of teams do. You look at somebody like Minnesota takes Johnny Flynn. They already have the Rubio thing hanging over him. They're trying this triangle offense. Like, they put him in a position to fail. We don't know if he's good or not. I mean, he was terrible last year, but do we know if Johnny Flynn's a bust? Like, I don't feel like we know.
I think that's true with a lot of players. And it's absolutely has so much to do with what the franchise is going to do and how bought in they are to the player. And, you know, the Biyombo, the other interesting side note is there is a lot of speculation that this kid is much, much older than his age. He is right now listed as an 18-year-old. He's actually listed as one of the 3 or 4 youngest players in this draft. That he doesn't pass the eye test on that at all. But, you know, look, neither did LeBron or Greg Oden, for that matter. You know, it's not always the case that you look at a guy and can tell. But he looks like a man. He looks like he's a 25-year-old Ben Wallace clone. And, you know, that's hard to buy sometimes that he's 18, and especially with the kids from Africa and not always having the most legit papers in the world. It's going to be hard to know. I don't think any team's going to figure this out definitively. You know, we had this issue a couple of years ago with where there was big questions about how old he really was. I think that's going to come into play here. But at the same time, in a lot of ways, what does it matter? The kid can play now. He's got an NBA body. It's not like he could go and play defense right now in the NBA. Whether he learns the other stuff or not, that's a big question. But he could come in and play defense and maybe be a Ben Wallace sort of player right now.
Is it fair to say that Derrick Williams is the only sure thing in this draft?
No, because I'm not sure he's a sure thing.
Okay.
I think he's a bit of a tweener. And I think that, again, landing on the right team, finding a position for him, finding a role, and then sort of committing to it at the next level, you know, he could be, you know, I hate to bring this up, he could be a Marvin Williams sort of player, a guy that just you're not quite sure what position he plays. He never sort of quite fits in a certain way. I think he's better because I think he's more athletic and I think he's more aggressive, and he's certainly done more at the college level. But tweeners always scare me when you get to the league, and in part they scare me because coaches have to figure out what to do with them, and they have to commit to it.
Well, wait a second. Why do you think he's a tweener? Why couldn't he just be basically play the 3 in the NBA?
I think that's probably where he needs to play. I don't think that he spent a lot of time in his life ever playing that position before. He was a power forward in high school. He really played that role at Arizona. He definitely started shooting threes this year and playing well in the perimeter. But I think he's still a player. He reminds me a lot of David West. Out of the Hornets, and I think if he thrives, it'll be thriving as a David West sort of player. And West was a guy who figured out what he was and what he wanted to do in the NBA, and then he's a terrific player. But
this guy shot 57% on 3-pointers last year.
He did. But when you've been doing that since high school, you're pretty sure that you're a guy who's going to be able to do that at the NBA level. When it's a sort of 1-year spike, it's a little bit more suspicious from a statistical standpoint. Not saying he can't do it, but you have to look at it a little bit differently.
So you think this draft is sure thing-less?
I think Kyrie Irving's a sure thing.
A sure thing to be
solid,
like a top one of the best 12 point guards, but maybe not one of the best 7. Yeah, exactly. I don't see how Kyrie Irving fails because he does everything well. I don't think he does that one thing that's great or elite, and that scares you a little bit. But he does everything well. The guy doesn't really have a major flaw to his game other than you wish he was an inch or two taller. Is he better than Mike Conley?
The basketball, he can shoot it. Yeah, because he shoots it better than Mike Conley does. And in fact, if there's one thing that I would err on the side of, okay, he does this elite, is that he's a pretty good shooter. For a point guard, better than most of these other elite point guards that have come into the draft. But he's not as savvy as Chris Paul. He doesn't have the athleticism of a guy like a Russell Westbrook. He's not as big and powerful as a Derrick Rose. He doesn't have the speed of John Wall. He doesn't have that one thing that sets him apart. And we're also in a golden era of young point guards in the NBA as well. Yeah. Good luck cracking an all-star game in the next 10 years with this cast of characters that he has in front of him right now.
That's why I don't like that pick as the number one pick, because to me, he's going to be, if he settles without, never gets injured, finds the right team, he'd be somewhere between like the 8th and the 13th best point guard in the league.
Yeah.
And if you're drafting a guy who probably will never make an all-star team, which I don't think he will because I just think that position's too loaded, that would make me kind of lean toward the Turkish guy a little bit. That's just me.
Yeah, well, and Bill, you've written a lot about this. A lot of it is about how risk-adverse are you as a GM. Kyrie Irving does not get you fired. He just doesn't. Because he's going to be your starter on your team probably from day one. He's going to have a great rookie season. He'll be in the mix for Rookie of the Year. Even if he's not an all-star, he's going to put up good numbers on your team. He's also a great kid from everything I understand, a good leader, smart. He's going to be a guy who fits on your team. And, you come away maybe not busting the draft, but a little bit like when the Bucks took Andrew Bogut. Andrew Bogut is not Chris Paul, and he's not Darren Williams, but he also doesn't get you fired in Milwaukee because
I guess
solid.
The difference with that, though, is that Bogut had a chance to be one of the best 5 guys at his position, and this guy doesn't. So maybe that's just a reflection of how bad this draft is. But
I'm not sure there's anybody in this draft that has the chance to be the best top 5 player at his position. Maybe Kanter, but I think, as we said before, look, I'm not here claiming, and I don't think you'd find one guy in the NBA claiming that they know that.
Right.
It's rolling the dice.
Well, if you're, obviously if the Kings got the number one pick, Irving would be a nice fit for them because they do need a point guard, and they kind of have the other pieces and all that stuff. But then when you start looking at some of the other teams, the poor Raptors. Not only did they extend Brian Colangelo today, which I'm still scratching my head about, but it just seems like every time they get a chance to get a lottery pick in the top 3, either they have bad luck or it's a draft that just stinks. And this is, they won the number one pick in the Andrea Bargnani year. And now it's, they have a chance to do that here. I feel bad for them. I feel bad for their fans. Then the T-Wolves. Did you see that stat? The T-Wolves have never moved up in the lottery?
Yeah. They're one of 5 teams in the lottery right now this year that have actually never won the lottery before.
They've never moved up. They've never jumped a spot.
They've never jumped a spot. They by far are the team that's due, and that they've been the worst team. The Pistons actually have never won the lottery. Jazz have never won it. Bobcats are probably the other team that may surprise some people that they've never won the lottery. They got close once, but
with Okafor.
And then the Suns.
Yeah.
Have never won the lottery. The Wolves are due, though.
They sure are.
I can't imagine there'd be anybody that happy in the league that they were turning the number one pick over to David Kahn.
I'm going to give you my David Kahn theory, which I've yet to introduce, I think, in a podcast or a column. So we can all agree that his job is kind of a little bit in trouble right now, right? He's not rock solid at this point.
Well, if his owner wasn't Glenn Taylor, I would say sure. But given how long Kevin McHale lasted in Minnesota, who knows?
They don't have a number one pick next year. The Clippers own it. No pick. So if they're going to do year 5 of the rebuilding project, because it's really we're now in year 5. It might even be in year 6. I can't even remember.
Since the Garnett trade.
Since the Garnett trade, which was 2008, but they made the lottery that year. So if they're going to go through this again and pick another young guy and have another young team with no cherry at the end of the sundae with, don't worry, guys, we have one more number one pick, then we're done. It just seems like it would make a lot more sense for this team to trade this number one pick and try to get help immediately. And like a guy I'm looking at, Atlanta's going to be over whatever cap we end up with. And, maybe you trade that number one pick for Josh Smith with Beasley and you get their pick back. Or you do something where you're getting a guy who's in his mid to late 20s, who's an established player. You put him with Kevin Love. You put him with Rubio if you're going to get Rubio. And you say, we're going to be good this year. Because if you're David Kahn, you have to do that because you're probably going to get fired if you go through year 7 of the rebuilding with no pick. You like this theory?
I like it. I think what I'm looking at is Kahn has talked a pretty aggressive game about Ricky Rubio. They say they love him. They say he's coming over. They've been very aggressive in saying that this is the year that he's going to come over and that he's their franchise point guard and that they made the right decision in the draft a couple of years ago and that when they add Rubio to the mix, everything's going to change. The team's going to take off. In fact, he was very frustrated last year, and he said so in the press conference that his team didn't get better. He thought he put a lot of talent on the floor. He didn't think Rambis or the talent produced at his level. I think Kahn's crazy. I don't think young players in the league like that really win basketball games, and I don't think his talent is as good as he thinks it is.
Let me jump in on this
for a bad team.
Let me jump in on that.
Yeah.
This is the Scott Layden philosophy, too, then Scott Layden and then Isaiah Thomas. This is what drove the Knicks into the ground. They were just collecting pieces, but there was no thought into how the pieces would interact with one another. It's great that you had the Michael Beasley risk. Smart trade. You got him for a second-round pick. It's nice that they were able to basically buy Anthony Randolph for the remainder of Eddie Curry's contract. Those are two guys that should never play together under any circumstances. They're basically the same guy. So you have those two guys together. You have to play them. It doesn't make sense. It's just not logical. Look at how Chicago is built with these different role players, and Noah's the rebounding defense guy, and Boozer's going to make his high picks, and Gibson and Nasic come off the bench, and it's a team that makes sense. This Minnesota team makes no sense whatsoever. It's just a collection of guys who are kind of assets in their own right, but collectively make no sense.
Well, it doesn't make sense unless – this is what confuses me about Kahn. What I thought the Wolves were actually doing this year was I thought they were collecting assets a little bit like Danny Ainge did a few years ago.
Yep.
And then they were going to start packaging some of those assets, maybe even Kevin Love, package some of those assets together, get a couple of really good younger veterans, and be a playoff team. The way his press conference made it sound at the end of the season, he actually thought that the collection of players he had were good.
He was shocked.
Danny never thought the players that he got in Boston were good. He was collecting assets.
Yep.
And trying to figure out how to package those to get the players around him. If Minnesota's doing that, if they're collecting assets, I don't think that's particularly a bad strategy in the NBA, especially with the lockout coming and the new collective bargaining agreement and a cap falling and a lot of different things. There may be a lot of teams desperate to unload players who would like those young players on rookie contracts coming back, and you could see Minnesota sort of collecting assets. But I'm not confident at all, unless David Kahn is just bluffing to the press right now. Maybe he is. That's what they think is going on at all. But I just get back to that point. If Rubio is their guy, then it makes absolute sense what you said. Trade that pick if they get the number 1 pick. Package it together. Start to get assets. If you really believe in Ricky Rubio, then you start building around him and maybe Kevin Love, and you get rid of all these other players. You package them together. You bring in some veterans and some role players around these guys, and you have the makings of a really solid team. I think we're going to find out what the Wolves really think about Ricky Rubio and what they really think about whether he's coming out or not when we see what happens with this draft pick.
Or you trade Rubio to the Clippers and you get your 2012 pick back.
Or that's a possibility as well. But, it's so hard for general managers in general. I'm not picking on Khan here, but just in general, to let go of the guys that they have personally selected.
Yeah.
And it's a psychological problem that basically tells us that we don't make mistakes. We select people for good reasons. So even if all the evidence shows us that we've made mistakes, we continue to cling until the bitter end onto these guys, hoping that they'll turn out to vindicate us. And I think that is part of the challenge in Minnesota. It requires Khan or any general manager to swallow their pride a little bit when they draft a guy for what will be probably pennies on the dollar. If you trade Ricky Rubio for their pick next year, that's not commiserate at all with what they were claiming they got when they got him at number 5 in the draft. It takes a lot of pride, but I think the best GMs do it. I think
Chris Wallace did it.
They've done it in the past.
Chris Wallace, that was one of the reasons the Grizzlies almost made the third round. You got to give him credit. He made a terrible pick with the Vite, but he got out of it. It was a sunk cost, and he made the best of it, and he moved pretty quickly. I do wonder with Rubio, with just the reports of how he played in Europe, and I don't think he has the same value around the league that he did a year ago. I don't, for instance, I don't think they're getting a mega deal for him. I don't think a team is like, wow, we're hoarding these assets for a chance to get Ricky Rubio. I just don't think he's at that level anymore.
You're right. I don't think he is either. Though I do know some scouts that I respect really feel that the NBA game will be a much better fit for him, and that he has stagnated a bit in Europe and needs the higher competition. But to be honest, when I watched him this year, I just was not impressed. That was hard for me to read that into what I saw.
Chad, here's my dream. Minnesota gets the number 1 pick, and they decide they like Irving the most. They decide they need to trade Ricky Rubio. They look at the Clippers, who own their 2012 number 1 pick. They realize that they're going to stink again this year. They need that pick back. America realizes that Ricky Rubio needs to be throwing alley-oops to Blake Griffin. Everybody wins. It's a huge win. He's in an L.A. market. He's doing what he does best. He's just distributing. Minnesota gets their pick back. Who doesn't win in that scenario?
No, I think it would be a very good deal for Minnesota to do that, with the exception of then, yet again, they're getting more lottery picks. And at some point, these young teams have to begin to add veterans. I know some people will point to the Thunder and say that's not always the case. You look at the Thunder, and they did really build through the draft. They stuck with their players. They stuck with the players that they've drafted. They've got Westbrook starting, Harden playing a big role on the team. You have Durant starting. You have Ibaka starting now. All players that were drafted by him. And yes, they made a trade for Kendrick Perkins, and Nick Collison plays a big role in that team. But they've built through the draft. I think if you get Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, you can do that. If you don't, you can't.
This is a little controversial, but I also think they need to trade Kevin Love this summer. If you're basically, Minnesota has all the different pieces to go in 3 different directions. They can either go rebuild. They can just keep collecting young assets with no plan whatsoever, or they can try to win now, which I think would be a mistake. Kevin Love is a pretty smart guy who comes from a family where his dad has been through the rigors of the NBA and wants him to be on a good team. He's been on good teams his whole life. I don't see any reason why he would stay in Minnesota with the way this team has been run. Like, think about it. If you're Kevin Love, are you saying, man, I can't wait to sign that T-Wolves extension when they offer it? Aren't you thinking, like, I'm the one guy that actually is smart enough not to sign that extension and become a free agent and pick my team? I think he's out.
He's been really unhappy. I think we know that. I think he's been somewhat vocal about it.
Yeah.
And some of it's been with Rambis. Some of it's just been with the overall general direction, of the team. But I'll also say this, as smart as he is or whatever, smart players also understand the financial calculations. They also understand the financial risk. We don't know exactly how the collective bargaining agreement will change and how that will affect what happens with rookies and their deals.
That's a good point.
But it's a pretty big risk. And Kevin Love stock is at an all-time high right now.
Yeah.
And Minnesota would probably, just in the desperation to keep somebody, offer him the max. And I'm not sure. I like Kevin Love. And he had an amazing year rebounding the basketball. I'm not sure he's a max player. And he may be able to cash in on that. And, at the end of the day, for so many of these players, the financial security is, as much as they talk the game about winning and everything else, the financial security is the bigger of the two. I doubt he passes down if he gets a max contract extension. I doubt he passes it down.
What if the Lakers call Minnesota and say, "Hey, we're going to trade Bynum, but we need some big pieces back. We need Kevin Love, we need maybe Vesely Johnson." Yeah,
I don't know. I just don't know. Given Bynum's injury history, and given how much David Kahn thinks that Darko Milicic is the greatest passer since Vlade Divac.
He is. You didn't know?
Given that, I don't know that they do that. I don't actually know what Andrew Bynum's stock is right now. When I've called around the league and asked about it, I think a lot of teams are wary of Andrew Bynum right now.
Yeah, I would be. Well, what if
I think they're wary of him. So why give up Kevin Love for that? Especially if you're also asking them to give up their number 3 pick last year on time. It may be the other way around. Maybe the Lakers are going to have to package another prospect or player with Bynum to get a young player like that.
That's a good point. I rescind my fake trade because you're right. Vesely Johnson and Love is way too much. I forgot that Vesely was number 3, but I think a Love Bynum thing could be pretty interesting, and maybe Phoenix could be home for him. I don't know. It just seems like I think that guy's out of there, and I know it'd just be so easy to just get an insurance policy to make sure you don't get screwed with the money you're leaving on the table for that 1 year. People are always going to want Kevin Love anyway, but don't you think it's fascinating that Minnesota basically holds the cards for this draft?
I also think it's fascinating we just spent 30 minutes talking about Minnesota.
Well, they hold all the cards. They do.
They may or may not hold the cards, Bill. If they slide to 4th in the draft, they don't hold anything.
Well, they have a top 3 pick.
That's a terrible pick in this draft.
Oh, it is. Well, though, wouldn't you say that you probably have as good of a chance of getting the best player in this draft at number 8 than you do at number 1? Because who the hell knows?
Well, historically, it's sort of panned out that way. I just went back and looked in the last 17 years of the draft lottery. Really, the top pick in the draft, the number 1 pick, was the best player in the draft only about 6 times, maybe 7, depending if we're ready to King John Wall is the best pick of 2010, which, maybe we are. But you got to go back 17 years. You got Tim Duncan in 97. It was a no-brainer.
LeBron.
Elton Brand, a little bit controversial, but that draft of 1999 was not a particularly strong draft. He was probably the strongest player in the draft. LeBron in 2003, Dwight Howard in 2004, Derrick Rose in 2008, I think is a no-brainer at this point. And I think looking at the draft of 2009, Blake Griffin is going to be a no-brainer for that draft as well. That's it. Every other year, it was not the number 1 pick in the draft that turned out to be the best player in the draft.
And best case scenario for this 11 draft, I think, is that it turns out like 06. So 06 goes Bargnani, LaMarcus Aldridge, nice pick, Adam Morrison, Ty Thomas, Sheldon Williams. That was a tough.
Well, you didn't say anything about Adam Morrison.
Well, he got hurt. I still think if he doesn't hurt his knee and doesn't have a mental breakdown, he's maybe a 3-time All-Star.
Okay.
I can't have that. Can I cling on to that hope?
Yeah, just like I cling on to the hope that if Darko had been drafted by Denver instead of Detroit and didn't have Larry Brown killing him psychologically every day, he would have been an all-star. Yeah, you can cling to it.
I'm not going to laugh at that comment. I think Darko was in the worst possible position he ever could have been in going to that Pistons team. Because not just the Larry Brown part, but he's in there with the Wallaces and this veteran team, and he's this 19-year-old kid with dyed hair who, just had deer in the headlights. Denver might have been better for him.
Yeah, he also thought he was better than he was. I mean,
right.
I think part of it, too, was he had a chip on his shoulder. I remember I was up at a preseason game covering just the training camps, and I was in Detroit, and I was on the team bus, I believe, with the Pistons, and they were going to the arena at the Palace, and the Palace was I think they were playing the Nuggets in the preseason, and there was something about Carmelo Anthony. There was something on the billboard or something about, come see Carmelo Anthony in the Nuggets or whatever, and he was like, Carmelo Anthony, that guy's a joke. I'll destroy Carmelo Anthony. Why is my name up there? And, this was in the, in the preseason. And, that happens with players, too, the overconfidence. And then when you get the reality of what the NBA really is about and how good these guys are, it happens. But, I think 2006 draft is a good analogy for this draft if the draft turns out okay.
Well, I'm looking at it right now. Aldridge was 2, Brandon Roy was 6, Rudy Gay was 8. And then Bogdani, I'll give like a half credit to, number 1. I mean, he's been a solid starter. He couldn't guard Jinlan's chair, but he's still not bad. So 3.5 players out of the top 20 have turned into really solid starters or better. And then Rondo went 21st. And then Kyle Lowry 24th. And we're done. So, maybe that's how this draft turns out.
It could be
5.5 guys, and that's it.
One of the funny things about this draft is every year we do these sort of tiers. A lot of NBA teams draft this way. So you clump players in tiers, and the philosophy is that you don't draft a guy if there's somebody left in a tier, let's tier 2. You don't ever draft a guy in tier 3, even if he meets a need more. You always draft the best player available in the tier. Once you're in tiers, then you sort them by team need. And there's a tier 1, which is NBA superstar. Then there's a tier 2, which is, very good starter to all-star. And then there's a tier 3, which is, sort of just, third, fourth man starter. And then a, tier 4, which is rotation player and on down. This draft doesn't have a tier 1. It has 2 players in tier 2.
Barely.
And I'm not sure there's a tier 3. And then you go down to tier 4, and then it's loaded. Actually, as far as rotation players go, I think there's a lot of talent in this draft. And if you're drafting 14, 15, 16, this may be a really good year for you to get a really solid player there. If you're drafting 3, 4, and 5, you couldn't really have a worse year to be drafting in that range, because your best case scenario is that probably you're getting a rotation player. And teams, nobody wants to live with that high in the draft. And so that's when you start reaching, you start swinging for the fences, you start hoping that perhaps one of these guys with upside with very little production pans out. And this is where major mistakes happen in the draft.
Make a pick. Who's winning the lottery?
Make a pick.
Make a pick. No, I want you to make a pick. I'm serious. I'm dead serious.
All right. As we speak, I'm going to the mock draft lottery machine.
All right. I'm looking at all the odds, too, on an elite.
I do this every year.
Okay.
I'm pulling it up. We built this thing in 2003 really to handle all the interest in LeBron. And that year, the way we designed this thing, LeBron's picture was on the front of this thing, and his jersey just changed because it was so sure he was going to be the number 1 pick. But I'm going to play the lottery. I'm just going to play it one time. I trust this. I actually had a lot of success with this except last year, and I had the Cleveland Cavaliers winning for the lottery.
With their own pick or via the Clippers?
No, look at that. Chance to win 2.8%. So that is with the pick that they got from the Clippers.
Look at that. See, that was our pick. Cousin Sal and I were looking at the lottery odds today, and we both decided the Cavs via the Clippers was 22-1. I tweeted this earlier. We both decided naturally that's what's going to happen. It will be with the stupid Clippers pick that they threw in to get rid of Baron Davis, who was one of the worst free agents they've ever signed. And that's how this will pan out. I like this.
Well, there's a history to this. It's actually been eerily predictive in years past. It wasn't last year, but it's been eerily predictive in years past. That would be the Clippers have that Clippers pick has the 8th best chance of winning the lottery. But look, that's not unprecedented. Go back to 2005, the 5th best chance. The 5th-seeded teams won it twice. The 6th-seeded teams won it twice. The 9th-seeded team won it once. That was the Bulls in 2008 with Derrick Rose. And the 2nd-seeded team won it once. That was the Clippers with Blake Griffin. 2 is the Detroit Pistons, actually, which means, there you go, this holds true to form. Minnesota slides all the way to 3. They actually go down.
All right, I'm going to play it once, just for the hell of it. This is on ESPN.com if you're ever interested in banging this out. And I have the Toronto Raptors winning. But I'm never accurate with these. I trust you more.
Okay, you got the Toronto Raptors.
Last big question. Utah just takes Jimmer Fredette, or there's a riot in Utah, right? They have to take him in 12. I mean, they just have to.
There will be a riot. And if it was any other general manager than Kevin O'Connor, I would say that the pressure with 2 picks to do it would be so enormous that they would cave. Kevin is one of those guys that I don't think he'll cave. Now, I think he likes Jimmer Fredette. I think they've scouted him very carefully. They've understood the pressure there. I think they like him. But he's not the sort of guy, if you've been around him at all, he's so old school, he's so tough. He will not make this pick based off of the pressure, but the pressure is enormous. They are producing many documentaries and specials in Utah about Jimmer Fredette. They're following him around everywhere. I'm constantly talking on Utah radio and Utah TV about this guy. I mean, this guy is Elvis.
You got to do it. Now. You have to do it because nobody really cares about your team anymore because you got rid of Darren Williams and Jerry Sloan. And also, this is a guy that, worst case scenario, is a really good ninth man who just makes 25-footers.
I think the challenge for them is going to be what happens. Well, one is that if they could win the lottery and they'd have Kyrie Irving there, it's a bit of a no-brainer for them. But I think the other guy that's really intriguing, and I don't know how I feel about it, scouts maybe like him more than I do, is Brandon Knight. There's an argument to be made that Brandon Knight, though he was rocky as a freshman at Kentucky, is a big-time prospect.
Like a
Rondo. His size and his athleticism, he's a big-time prospect. And do you pass on him because he might be on the board when the Jazz draft with their first pick? Do you pass on him, take somebody else with a 6th pick, and then come in and get Jimmer at 12? And then the other thing is there's a risk. Every other team in the league is operating under the assumption that Jimmer Fredette goes either 12 or 13. 13 is the Phoenix Suns pick. And so if there's a team that's in love with him and they're trying to move up in the draft, that's where they're eyeing, is that 10th or 11th pick, because I don't think he goes ahead of that in the draft. I don't think there's any other team that's sitting out there that takes him higher than those picks. You could wait around and then have a team jump in ahead of you and take him, and that would be a disaster for Utah. So I don't know what's going to happen with the Jazz. They always play it close to the vest, but if they draft him, I'll swear that's because they thought he was the best player at that position. I do not think Kevin O'Connor cracks under the pressure.
Last question. Sacramento. Back in Sacramento for one more year at least, trying to get a new stadium done, maybe moving. Somebody tweeted me today that there's a history in the NBA of teams that are kind of on the fringe of moving that somehow miraculously get a top 2 or a top 3 lottery pick. What happens if Sacramento gets a 1 or 2 pick?
I do think if you asked what team sort of needs this the most, you know, what's the best story that's out there? I mean, Cleveland is a good story because they lost LeBron. If there had been a superstar in this draft, it had been a better story. The fact that there isn't doesn't really make it that great year. Maybe the Cavs want to wait another year before they win the number 1 pick in the draft and go after Anthony Davis next year, who's a much, much better prospect.
Yeah.
I think the Kings make a great story. Because I think there'd be a lot of excitement in Sacramento about it. I think it would help them sell tickets. Look, I'm not in love with Sacramento. I'm from Kansas City. And so I don't really weep for Kings fans who are crying about their team leaving since they stole them from Kansas City.
Yep.
And I don't understand for the life of me why, with the great arena that's been built in Kansas City, and a good, I know it's a football town, it's a Chiefs town, but there's plenty of support for basketball with KU and MU there. Why they wouldn't move them back to Kansas City if they're gonna move this team? Why have a third team in Southern California when you can move a team out to a place like Kansas City, which has a great NBA arena? I don't understand that. I think
Chad Ford, I can answer that for you.
Yeah, they
don't have the money group that's dumb enough to pay off all the Maloof's debt to get them to come to Kansas City. That's what this was entirely about. They went to Anaheim because Anaheim said, if you come here, we will cut checks to cover this, and this. Oh. Kansas City doesn't have that one billionaire who, by the way, would be a hero in Kansas City if he brought the Kings to Kansas City, if he brought them back, right? And then you think about it from the ethics of stealing a team from another city. They're stealing a team back. It's like marrying your ex-wife. So they obeyed that law too. It makes the most sense. But
you really can't have the righteous indignation from fans if they went back to Kansas City.
No,
it would really shut that down in a certain way. Of course, there's other teams that actually had the Kings before Kansas City did, so you could even go back even further. But I'm not so sure that Rochester is going to be getting an NBA team anytime soon.
Or Cincinnati,
or Cincinnati for that matter. But that's. So I really felt all along that the Anaheim thing was a joke. It's I think it's terrible to put a third team
in
California. I'd been happy with Vegas if they were going to move them there. I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. But I'm happy for Kings fans. I don't like to see NBA teams leave. I still have Sonic fans who are just dying. They're literally dying inside right now to see how well this young Thunder team is playing and to think that team could be back in Seattle right now. And I don't wish any ill will on the Kings fans. So I think it would be great for them. I think getting the number one pick in the draft is a great narrative. It gets the ball rolling. Maybe it gets the city excited enough to go ahead and work out the deal with the Maloofs that they need to work out, and they get to keep their team. And I know there's a lot of passionate fans in Sacramento who this team is their whole life. And if they're not going to go to Kansas City, I'd love to see them stay in Sacramento.
Also, probably the team that could be the most intriguing next year if they got number one, they took Irving, who, as we said, is somewhere between, his upside is top 8 point guard or top 12, somewhere in there. You add him with Evans, you add him with Cousins. They have a ton of cap space.
Yep.
They have Caspi, who they'll hopefully start playing. You'd have the hint of something. And really, if you have Evans and you have Cousins, you need a point guard to kind of run that show and get them involved and make sure. So,
they've learned character, and they've learned, the hard way that character matters.
Yep.
And they took two gambles on guys who I think have both bit him in the butt a little bit. Cousins more than Evans, but Evans has had his fair share of issues with chemistry and the team. But Irving, high quality kid, natural leader, I think could dramatically turn things around in Sacramento. I do think they're the one team, if they got the number one pick in the draft and then they use their cap money wisely of the bad teams, there's a shot they make the playoffs next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Evans and Cousins, if you get those guys going at the same time, I don't know if it's possible. I would say there's, a 1 in 3 chance you can get. It's basically it's a weird version of the LeBron Wade thing, where I think Cousins wants to be the guy, and I think Evans feels like he's the guy, and that's why Irving, I think, would be so important for them. Because he could basically decide it for him every play.
And then all you have to do is add veterans. You've got those three guys. Don't add any more young players at that point. Start to add really quality, high-character veterans on the team, and especially a big guy who can stand up to DeMarcus Cousins.
They have a couple already. I mean, Bino, if they had Irving and Bino's your backup, that's pretty good.
Yeah. They Dallenberg, they have, and
Dallenberg's leaving, right? He was a free agent.
He's a free agent, though. I think Sacramento actually wants to keep him. Not at the number he was getting paid before, but I think they would like to keep him. But
Marcus Thornton, we like Marcus Thornton.
Yeah, and Marcus Thornton too. Yeah. I mean, talk about a guy coming off the bench who can score.
It's an interesting team. I think this could end up being a feel-good story. I really do. It seems like at the very least, people have kind of figured out why the Mavs wanted to move that team, and Kevin Johnson did a nice job of stepping up and getting investors going, and it seems like the team should just stay there.
If I was going to make one pick for the sake of the league, I would say give the Wizards the number one pick again, give John Wall another guy to pair with, and let's see DC basketball come back. I like Ted Leonsis. I think they've got the right ownership team. Now to turn this team around. I'd love to see basketball in DC be reinvigorated again.
And they made a good trade too. I like the Heinrich trade.
Oh yeah, I think they're feeling really good about the Heinrich trade right now.
They've done a couple good trades.
Especially when Mike Bibby decided to leave a year of his contract behind on the table.
Will we ever figure out why that happened? I think Leonsis gave him some AOL stock.
There's got to be something that was unprecedented.
It really was. He walked away from $6 million.
Yeah.
Without really it becoming a story.
Yeah, and the Wizards are an intriguing team. I mean, they really are, and if they could get a really solid pick in there, Derrick Williams is the guy I think that would be a really nice fit on Washington.
Well, the other thing with them is it seems like they're going to have that amnesty clause again if they can figure out this lockout, which we saw back in, what was it? I can't remember what year.
Oh, yeah, the Allen Houston rule.
Yeah, the Allen Houston rule. That's what's called.
End up using it on Allen Houston. But
I got to say, as a Celtics fan who is competitive with this stuff, man, that's a big, big, big life raft to throw to the Orlando Magic, to say you can wipe off any contract, one contract off your cap, you still have to pay it. If they get that life raft with Gilbert Arenas, that totally changes their chances of keeping Dwight Howard, I think.
Oh, they're the biggest team that benefit from it by far.
But unfairly.
It'll be interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if some of these small market teams that have been very fiscally responsible are going to really oppose that.
They should.
There's a lot of teams out there that have actually really been careful with their cap space, and it's a competitive advantage they have now, and it sort of really screws them if teams like Orlando and Washington, all these other teams, can dump these bad contracts all of a sudden, and it doesn't benefit like a team like the Pacers that have been really careful with all their contracts. It screws them.
Yeah. And, you look at a team like the Lakers that could just wipe off Luke Walton's contract.
No, Ron Artest.
Oh, you're right. They would do Artest.
No, that would be
you're
the
right.
other single biggest win for a team besides, I think, Orlando, is to be able to get Ron Artest off the books in L.A. That guy's got 4 years left on his deal, right? Or 3 years left on his deal.
Yeah, 3 years. Rashard Lewis is the second big winner, I think. Don't you think?
Well, just Washington already has some wiggle room, and they're rebuilding anyway. For Orlando, who still fashions himself as a contender, and for the Lakers, who fashion themselves as a contender, getting those contracts off and gives them some flexibility that I think helps them more immediately than it does Washington.
The Celtics would take Jermaine O'Neal's body behind the Fleet Center, and that would be it for him. But, yeah, I don't like it. I think I don't like anything that rewards what Otis Smith did the last few years and how recklessly he spent money. It just seems unfair to me. Maybe they should make a rule that Gilbert Arenas and Rashard Lewis are the only two contracts you're not allowed to wipe off.
That'd be
it. It's just like, you guys don't get the benefit.
Throw Artest in there, too. What the Lakers were thinking when they gave that guy a 5-year deal. Talk about buyer beware. They knew.
Well,
they gave it to him anyway.
It is interesting. There aren't that many bad contracts left out there. It's certainly not like it was 5 years ago.
There's not, and that's why I think there could be significant pushback from NBA teams to do this, because like the last time, there were so many teams that were in that predicament. It benefited virtually every team in the league. It's not the case anymore. It benefits a few teams. Right. And, that's why I think it could be opposed.
Mikhail Prokhorov will be totally for it because he can get rid of Travis Outlaw's contract.
Yeah.
That would be another one. Sometimes we should make like a top 10 contracts teams would be most delighted to get rid of. Travis is in the top 5. Anyway, Chad Ford. I think you hit it. I think we saw the future on this podcast. I think the Cavs are going to win with the Clippers pick. Everybody who listened to this they can say that they were listening when it happened. Thanks for everything you do, and we will talk to you as we get closer to the draft.
All right, see you, Bill.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at PodCenter at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.